Welcome back to Digital Trends Live. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hit that subscribe button to make sure you get the notifications when we do go live. Right now, we're going to have a discussion about privacy and security, about our data, and in particular as well, go into what this is with the California, I want to make sure that I'm getting it right too, the CCPA, which you've probably seen those that acronym in places, the California Consumer Privacy Act. We're going to talk about what that is and how it's going to affect you and us. And right now, we've got an expert joining us, absolutely, who's Rehan Jalil from Securiti.ai, the founder and CEO. Hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for hosting.
This is a great discussion that I'm looking forward to having here. And for everybody watching, can we get a little bit of a background for yourself and what Securiti.ai does, and then get into some of these particulars?
Yeah, our core mission is to have the companies to be good custodians of people's data. And that's what essentially what CCPA and some of these regulations are trying to do. We are a company based in Silicon Valley. And introducing something new which will enable companies to be better custodians of people's data and enable people to exercise their rights that these privacy regulations are giving to them.
Which is so important. I mean, I think more and more people are aware of just how much data that we're giving out, that you give out if you're on a social media platform or any kind of platform where you're giving data. Companies are using that. They're monetizing it, and it is important to know how it's being utilized and what some of the protections are. So getting into this CCPA, can we walk through a basic explainer of what that is, and then maybe get into some of the actual specific effects that it'll have?
Essentially, this regulation, it actually gives the rights to the people on their data. If it's your data that you've given to a company directly or indirectly, then you essentially are still the property owner in some ways, and you can go back to a company and ask that this data be deleted, or they stop selling this data to other companies, or you want to just know what kind of data they have about yourself. That's the most fundamental rights that these regulations are actually giving to the people. On the other hand, from the enterprises and companies, it just actually encourages them and in fact, forces them to be better custodians of people's data. Also, the California Consumer Protection Act is not only about the companies in California. It is actually has a broad implication of any company that is doing business with consumers in California. The company could be headquartered anywhere, which means that it has a very broad implications. And I think one way for you to think about is that whenever there is some kind of a misuse of data, currently people don't have rights. Even in the case of Face app scandal that happened, people just couldn't really go and force their data to be deleted or pictures be deleted. Certain regulations like CCPA will give you and me and other people rights to go ask companies which we suspect are not using the data correctly to go ahead and delete our data.
Go ahead.
And what does it really require is that on the company side, it now requires new kind of software, intelligence, and technology to even understand that what kind of data they actually have about people. Because often these companies are large companies, they have a lot of different, thousands of systems in many cases, and hundreds of different groups that are working on people's data. And I think it requires new kind of intelligence and automation inside these companies, kind of more like a privacy ops kind of things that is going to be needed by the companies.
Which is huge. I think that there's a couple of points here that I want to talk about with what you brought up. I mean, one being that California, anybody's a consumer in California. Well, California is huge. I mean, there's so many people, which it means virtually any company that's online is going to have some interaction probably with somebody from California. I mean, in some way, shape, or form. So that's everybody has to pay attention to this. And I feel like what are the ramifications, I guess, for people that are outside of California? Will we see some of the benefits of this? And how would that specific interaction work? Like if you go to a website, you can just write them and say, hey, delete all my data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, these companies doesn't only have to be online. You don't have to be a web company, because even if you, let's say, a travel company, essentially your business is not necessarily web services. But you're collecting people's data, and you directly or indirectly may be sharing this data with others. And people may actually have want to actually have exercise those rights on companies which should not even just that company. So it's kind of broad implication, I would say. By some estimates, close to 500,000 companies would need to comply with CCPA. So that's the first thing.
Okay.
The second is the companies would need to make it easy for consumers to actually exercise their right, which means somebody should be able to go on this company's websites and fill a form and say, show me what data you have about me, or stop selling this data, or just go ahead and simply delete the data because I'm kind of moving on to a different service, or I don't want the history to be tracked. And the verticals, it actually, all verticals, think of this way: if we go to a retailer, they have all the data about your purchase history and which store you went to and what you bought. People would have broad rights to actually have that. Same like for travel companies. If you take a ride share with with a travel company or a mobility company, they have all the information about you, where you went, what location, what it is, who you're sitting with. All that information is considered now private information with this act, and people would have a right to go ask, say, first of all, tell me what you have about me, and secondly, if I choose to, I can ask you to go delete it. Now, it is other thing to note is that it is not just nice to do this thing. This regulation actually requires that this thing be done, and it has two kind of enforcement kind of things that will require, I think, companies to actually act. First, there is a penalty of up to $7,500 per incident, and this number can multiply very fast. If you have 1 million users which have a problem, this could be like $750 million, and it could go in billions. The second thing on the enforcement side is that it allows the class action lawsuits. So if the regulator doesn't have the bandwidth or time and attention, it's almost like crowdsourcing or enforcement through people going ahead and actually making a claim to say, look, my data was misused, and I can go to the court for that. So for that reason, we are seeing that there is certainly it's been taken very seriously. Other than that, I think with these guidelines, what we're seeing is some of the larger companies who actually really care about their brand and who actually really want to be good custodians of people's data. They're acting at a much higher level, not just because of this regulation and what the letter of law says. They're going kind of above and board in providing these rights to the people. It's just good for the brand.
Wow, those are some serious penalties. If they don't comply with this, if they're able to enforce that, that will probably get the attention of every single company in there. $7,500 per person. That's not a drop in the bucket when you talk about, like you said, you have 1 million people's data in there. That's a lot of fine, and that sometimes seems to be what actually gets companies' attention, is when you start affecting that bottom line to get them to enforce that. Well, I'm talking about companies that want to comply, because you're right. There are a lot of companies out there that want to do the right thing. And let's just give everybody an explanation of what Securiti.ai can do to help with that.
Yeah, I think when we looked at this landscape, we realized that previously a lot of compliances were driven more by third-party audits. One-time view in a year, some kind of an audit got done, and it was more driven by manual surveys. Now, with this regulation, because it's the rights on people's data, understanding of people's data and where it is sitting and who does it belong to and how it is getting used is actually the foundation for actually enforcement. It is not about getting some survey and getting an audit check done. It is all about now operationalizing privacy in everything that you do with this data. And also, not only that, how this data is stored and you give it back, do you actually have consent? And the consent really is not about universal use of the data. It actually also about what purpose did you collect this data from? If you looked at some of the companies when they collect phone numbers in the context of doing second factor authentication, you'll see that sometimes these phone numbers get used for marketing purposes, robocalls. So not only that you have to honor and protect and give the data back for the purpose for which the data was collected, you actually have to honor that for. So first of all, it's the underpinning is full understanding of a person's data, and then there's a stack on top of it, which is operationalizing the privacy inside a company. And there's a whole new domain and movement towards privacy ops. Just like DevOps and SecOps made automation on the sides of development and security, that privacy ops is a new big thing. And I bet you in a couple of years, there'll be dedicated positions and roles inside the company for the privacy ops. And that's what we really provide, a framework which gives everything that a company needs to do in one place to comply with CCPA and other global privacy regulations.
Well, it's certainly going to be important with the rollout of this new act from California, and to see how that shakes up. I know it starts on January 1st of 2020 is when we'll start seeing this, and certainly a great educational course that you just provided us, Rehan, on this. And I really appreciate you joining us here on the show at Securiti.ai. That's where people can check out everything that you've got going and how companies can work and comply with everything. Thanks so much for being here on Digital Trends Live today.
Thank you so much for hosting. Enjoyed the conversation.